I realize there's a great deal of interest in the topic of ecology coaching, so I'm quite excited to talk with you further about all that. I'll just quickly go through this because in talking about this with people, it's often very useful to point out specific things. People, especially in Russia, for example, they didn't know some of the evidence of climate change. They'd heard all sorts of skewed reports about it, mainly, I think, manufactured by oil companies, frankly. And the reports spoke about, the Earth is tilting, it's changing its axis and so on. But right now, there's a great deal of increase in water vapor. About 7% more water goes into the air with each temperature shift in global warming by 1 degree, 7% more water is found in the atmosphere. Now that water goes up and it literally comes down in a dump somewhere, either in a tornado or a big storm, a flood or something. It doesn't sprinkle down nicely over the summer season. It creates these very vicious events. And that's what's been affecting our weather. 7% more water in the atmosphere changes everything. But the other thing it changes is that in the desert areas, or frankly, the food growing areas of the world, from Syria to central Russia to Ukraine, there's much less water. The places that need the water aren't getting it. I was recently in Saudi Arabia. They hadn't had rain for a year. And so there's these vast changes. There's increased sea surface temperature. The oceans are warmer at the top, and therefore all the various phosphates coming from the agricultural fertilizer, which in fact is fossil fuel again. It flows into the ocean and creates poison. And the various kinds of growth in the ocean and in the Mediterranean Sea is very different than it's ever been. You can go all the way to that number 7. I just want to explain it a little bit. I'll go back to some of these if you're interested. This is something, you're all welcome to have this PowerPoint, by the way. I give it away. So what you see here are 400,000 years of carbon. This has been shown from the rocks. They've explored all sorts of sources to get this information. But since 400,000 years ago, these are ice ages, the carbon levels have gone up and down with the temperature. And so ice ages, you notice, go down to a certain area. And there's 4 of them here, big ones. And then there's points when it reverses, but it has never gone above this line in 400,000 years. That's how far they've measured it. Now this is 1950 right here. And notice where the line goes. Can you all see it? It's going straight up. So this is where carbon is right now, at a completely different level. And the temperature of the Earth is at a completely different level. Now this is shifting the water in huge ways. First of all, it's 25% more acidic. And that's a big stressor on the corals, the fish. When the corals die, many, many, many species of fish die. And the southern oceans changed entirely. So go to the next one if you wouldn't mind. Now this shows what actually happens. So the sun's rays come down, they hit the Earth, but can you see this filter here? That's carbon. So when the sun rays come up, only some of them get through that carbon shield, and the rest come down and are radiated back into the Earth's surface. And the bad news is that the level of carbon has increased by double in the last 10 years. So yes, this has been going on since the middle of the 18th century with the start of coal mines and cars and so on. But it's been hugely amplified in the last 10 years since the beginning of about 2009. So there's been an increase of, so we can expect it to double again. So the chances are very good that it will take only maybe 15 to 18 years before we reach 2 degrees of warming. And with 2 degrees of warming, they say there's no chance for the corals to live, that it will reduce the likelihood of many, many species being here. So we're now in the 6th big extinction on the planet. And in fact, a lot of the extinction is happening with insects, butterflies, bees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And other species are attempting to adapt, but depending on their environment, we're losing many of them. So I want a world where my grandchildren, your children, have a chance to go out into the mountains and find, you know, butterflies and animals. And they say even the wildflowers are being eradicated because the shifting heat doesn't allow for the very tender species to be there. And so everything is shifting radically on this planet of ours. Right now, scientists agree in multiple countries, this is on Wikipedia, that this climate change is a radical, destructive, and very difficult to eradicate problem that we need to begin with right away. These are the ones that disagree, and I've been looking at some of the different areas where people disagree. I'm very interested in that because I live right next to the United States. And almost all of them are members of think tanks that are paid for by some area of fossil fuels industry. Oregon had a plebiscite not too long ago attempting to put in a carbon tax, and the oil industry fought them with $300 million and won. Okay. So that's some of the basics, so I won't go into that. What I want to do is talk about what we can do about it as coaches. And I think that's what you're here for, right? You don't need to see about what is happening with plastic in the ocean. It's pretty horrendous, guys. Unfortunately, the birds, the seabirds, are taking the plastic and feeding it to their babies, and we may lose a huge number of all the ocean species, including the whales. The big sperm whales are taking it into their system, and many of them are also dying. Okay, you can turn it off. I won't really go into much more, unless you ask me questions, or if you wanted a deck of PowerPoints to show how climate change is affecting different areas, I'm quite willing to share it. What? Yes, please. Okay, great. So what can we do about it? Well, this is where I was quite discouraged for some time, and now I'm quite excited. Because with the World Game, we created 3 levels of doing. One is personal doing, and that is the hard part for most people because we all like our comfort zone. And we're addicts of fossil fuels. My husband and I have an electric car. We had to, you know, budget a lot to make that work well. But we did, and we got our electric car, and now we love it. We don't, you know, we don't have to pay gasoline bills. And it really does work to switch. We have a solar panel on our house. We have a home, and so putting a solar panel on was easy. We don't have to pay electric bills. It's rather nice. And this kind of information is not made available in most places. Solar is very cheap now. So in Germany and many countries, it's 40% solar. In Costa Rica, it's 100% solar. So countries that are working with it are really, really moving quickly. It's cheap, it's effective, and it works. So the thing is to start assisting people to think about this personally. This is the personal area. What can you do personally? You can change the kind of food you eat, make it more, eat less meat, and more foods that create less of a carbon footprint. That makes a difference. You can buy less things. The consumer industries are based on an outmoded economy model that can't work for our children. Right now, we're using up the Earth's resources incredibly. And if everybody had our lifestyle on planet Earth, if all the Africans had our lifestyle and the Indians, etc., it would take 3 worlds. Most people don't know that. And all the people in Africa think they're going to get there soon. Well, there's just not enough resources for us to make it all work on planet Earth. And that's bad news for people, because it's going to create wars and fights and pressure for goods. And some people think they can sort of live behind fences, but it's very difficult. We need to somehow empower all of us on this small blue planet to find ways to live together. And coaching is one of the main ways we can do that. Coaching allows people to gain inner resources. They get in touch with their values. They begin to get their priorities clear about who they want to be and why it's important. They start to discover a lot more about, we called it coach position earlier, but it's the ability to overview who do you want to become over the next 20 years? What kind of life and living and purpose do you want to have as a human being? How do you want your children to grow up? All these kind of questions get asked when people are able to take an overview position and aren't being pulled around by emotional associations that happen very fast and hook them from one zone of emotion to another zone of emotion, usually comfort zones. Do you know what I'm talking about, everybody? Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of growth spurt that humanity needs. And that happens. It happens in about 2 years. As you coach someone over a 2-year period, they reorganize their capacity to think, feel, be in charge of their emotions, to develop emotional intelligence on many fronts, in the area of motivation, in the area of self-regulation, in the area of simple value integration, as well as awareness. It's not just we coaches that get the value. The people we coach get it as well. They start to think like coaches. Mirror neurons work. Mirror neurons really work. Children working with teachers who are like coaches start to think in very different ways than kids who are raised around a top-down disciplining model of teaching. So thoughts about what I'm saying here. Do you agree or disagree? Do you think coaching can make a difference to the planet? I'll ask you that question.